calling the meeting back to order. At this point in time, we're moving on to item C, if the clerk would read. Oh, vote. Correct. Thank you for calling me on that. So at this point in time, if the city clerk is ready. Two missing. At this point in time, we have had discussion, we have a motion, and we have a second. Again, this vote is to recess to December 3rd, this public hearing. We now proceed with voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item C, if the clerk would read.
C is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trapp concerning hazardous material and civil emergencies amending City of Topeka Code Section 255, 020, and 030, and repealing Section 255, 010.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. We discussed this item last week, and we had Fire Chief here. If there are any questions regarding this ordinance, staff requests your consideration of adoption of this ordinance.
At this point in time, we have had a presentation from the chief. I don't know if there are some additional questions from the body. We have a motion for approval by Councilmember Lesser. We have a second by Councilman Jensen. Additional comments or questions with regards to this item? Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one brief one, and it's to reiterate a comment I made last week. I do hope that in the implementation of this, we can keep regarding the actual cost record that this ordinance requires, that we keep a double column, one being what in effect is the FEMA rate, and the other being a true full cost rate. My understanding is that rate is often, the FEMA rate's lower than the true cost. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments or questions? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item D, if the clerk would read.
Sorry.
D is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trapp creating a new chapter 8.65 of the Topeka Municipal Code requiring registration of vacant properties and properties that are the subject of mortgage foreclosure proceedings.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, we bring before you consideration of a vacant and our foreclosed property ordinance. I want to cover a few comments regarding what the purpose is for this. Primarily, this is a property registration program that we can use to hopefully address neglected and blighted properties. What we're looking at recommending is vacant and foreclosed property registration that will require properties that are chronically vacant, 60 or more days, or in foreclosure process to be registered with the city and maintained according to the IPMC guidelines. Registrable property is any residential or commercial property, whether vacant or occupied, that is in foreclosure process, and any property that has been vacant for more than 30 days. Vacant is defined as any building or structure intended for residential or commercial use, which is not currently occupied or in use by a person who resides on the property as the owner or tenant on a permanent, non-transient basis, and 2, a person or entity that is operating a business. There will be a presumption that a building or structure is vacant if there is no evidence of utility usage within the past 60 days, and there are boards over the windows, doors, or other openings. Properties will be registered or registration renewed every 6 months with this program. The registration fee is recommended to be $250 every 6 months. It requires an inspection every 30 days of the property by the mortgagee or their designee. It requires mortgagees to have a property manager for vacant properties in the foreclosure process. The properties get off registration by foreclosure process is finalized and the property is sold to a responsible party. Vacant properties must become occupied to get off the registration if the registration requirement is based on occupancy, not foreclosure. There have been a number of discussions that I've had with council members, and there are some concerns that we haven't addressed some things related to this ordinance, and are still some questions relative to that. In light of that, we would like to see this item deferred to another date, but I would like to have discussion regarding what items or questions or concerns to get them out in the open that you may have heard, also whatever testimony we might have from the public regarding this. We want to make sure that we understand what the issues were. We had very little, there were a few items that were suggested at the last time, but we want to make sure we have the issues addressed that are standing in the way of pursuing this. We feel like it's a potential opportunity for us as another tool in the tool bag to address a property that is blighted, and we would like to see it considered for implementation. But we understand that there are mitigating factors, and this is going to place a burden on certain people, and we want to make sure we understand what your issues or concerns are before we move forward.
Thank you, City Manager. Before we go into the discussion, I would like to start calling the individuals signed up for public comment. That way they could weigh in early on in the discussion. The first individual signed up to speak is Mr. Pat Delap.
Hi. I read this article, this ordinance, and I thought, the first thing was, oh my God, what is this? Many issues with this, some of which includes misinformation about not being able to find the owners of banks or homes. This could be attributed to stop not knowing real estate and real estate law. Did you know the city of Topeka does not have a licensed real estate officer? We are one of the few cities of the first class that does not have one. If we had one, maybe they would be more likely to be able to find owners of the property just by looking at the actual foreclosure file, not the stuff that is online. The stuff online is just a summary. If you go downtown and you pull the file up, they have the name of the new owner that bought it at the sheriff's sale. Attorneys can also get that information, but they have to be registered. And I do not recommend attorneys loaning their license out to anybody. There's been enough people got in trouble for that. You can't loan your license out. The public, you're not going to go down and get that in imaging. It used to be available, well, forget, it was 20 years ago. We generally can't get that information. We have to go downtown. The chief prosecutor, City of Topeka, has never had any problems finding people. He knows how to do it. Another thing a licensed person would know too is why the houses after or during the foreclosure process seems to take so long to have anything happen to them. I think one of our councilors complained about that one time. Well, typically that is because state legislature has allows something called the period of redemption. The period of redemption has to do with the amount of money that you loaned that paid off. They give you the right to purchase the property back from what the judgment was given. This does vary. This varies from 0 to 12 months depending upon the amount you paid off. Typically it's been a third, you get maybe several months, quarter, year, in up to 12 months. That period of redemption starts at the sheriff's sale, after that, not before. So the property has to sit there and let that period of redemption expire, or sometimes the smarter people the banks try to buy away that redemption right so they can get the property back in the market first. Trouble with this is if you buy the property and start working on putting $15,000, $20,000 into it and that period of redemption's not used up, they can redeem the property at that time. And they don't have to pay you a thing of your $15,000, $20,000. It's like a free gift to them. That's why the houses sit. Ordinance cities were designed for the housing market crash of 2007. Mortgages were used as derivatives to hedge funds. They were sold as stocks, things like this. It's very confusing of what it was. People were getting into houses with zero down. We had a lot of fraud with banks too, and you saw where it went. The Pew Charitable Trust did a report on this and looking at vacant property registration. The city contacted people who had these registrations already and asked, what results did you have? No one came up with any results. They didn't know whether they got more property back on the market or fixed up things like this. They're just collecting the money. City of Wichita has had one on the books since 2007, but it's not been used. No one in the public remembers it ever being used or even hearing about this. And the City of Wichita admitted, we don't use it. Pennsylvania had about 20 cities at one time doing something like this, but has since mostly abandoned because state law, like ours, required taxation be uniform. This registration tax felt to be in violation of that law, and they feared litigation. May have additional time.
Do we have a motion to extend some additional time? How much time would you need, Mr. Delap?
Way too much asking for 4. I've got like several pages. Actually, if you guys read this, I can skim it. Okay, if you read it, I could skim it, 2 minutes.
Councilwoman Heller?
Move to extend for 3 minutes.
3 minutes extension. Do we have a second? We have a second by Councilman Emerson. We all proceed by voting for an extension of 3 minutes.
We have 7 yes.
7 having voting yes, your time is extended for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Chris Standovich, Director of Policy at the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group, a nonprofit that focuses on affordable housing, said vacant property tax is not necessarily the best way to solve housing problems in this city. There were 10,000 vacant or abandoned parcels. Many owners simply don't pay the taxes and let the city seize the property. They walk away, basically. It was noted in high housing cost cities, an attempt was made to use this tax realization as a way to get more buildings in use to help people afford housing. Many of those cities include a hot housing market like San Francisco, San Jose, Washington, D.C., New York, and Vancouver. Vancouver, for example, a quick look at Craigslist shows one-bedroom apartments going for $2,200, $1,700, $3,000, $2,500 respectively. A two-bedroom could be around $3,000 a month. People were buying properties there, holding on to them, and although rentals high, they were just leaving them vacant. I really haven't wrapped my mind around they were doing it, but that was happening. So it could be effective that way. Having a registration tax in these high-cost cities help fill storefront and residential properties. The use of special taxes registration on vacant properties is a blunt instrument. The empty storefronts in those high cities are less often the result of landlords looking to jack up rents, and more often a landlord looking for a stable person, somebody who's going to be a long time. Levying a tax registration fees might drive landlords to fill vacancies, but the new tenant may not be the type of that neighbors like. It could be somebody, a criminal, could be a sex offender, things like this. You'll want to get somebody in there so we don't have to pay that large registration fee. Bad mistake. You're going to hurt the neighborhoods doing that. In Hartford, they have a similar common to ours. The city has had a steady exodus of large and small employers to the suburbs or surrounding areas where taxes are lower. What is left is vacant lots, vacant buildings, and growing number of parking lots. Ultimately, the decline in local realty may be the change of the markets going to the internet than the problem is, what's Westwood Mall going to be like in 15 years? Lawsuit has been filed against the City of Chicago and Chicago lost. The federal court ruled they can't require registration on government loans. HUD, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which would be also send it to VA loans, things like this. And how many people with those loans, those type of loans federally guaranteed, are likely to go bankrupt? Enough. Another suit is in the mix, was filed in Gloucester County of New Jersey. It's still active, started in 2008, and it may involve names that you know. Take a look at the hyperlink, things like this. There's many more things we could do. Thank you. I stand for questions. Somebody wants to have any for me?
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Delap.
Thanks.
The next person signed up to speak is Mr. Clark Trammell.
Good evening. Being an ex-banker, this is something that really tweaked my interest. I applaud the city manager for bringing this forward. I'm going to take a different slant than what was just presented to you. I don't think you're ready tonight to get anywhere close to making a decision on this because there's way too many moving parts. In 4 minutes is not going to give me a chance to sit here and educate, lay out all the different things that need to be done. But what I would do is offer, if you ever want me to sit with your group or a committee and outline how to structure this and what it means, I'm glad to do that. But the one thing that I see, the positive part of where this conversation, where I'm going to take it is, doing this helps us to better understand our community if we take this data and put it into a bigger plan, that housing study that's being done, and take that information, join it with this ideology, in theory, to help us understand our community better as we plan the growth and the plans for the future. This information could be vital. But to structure this effectively, you're going to have to set up a servicing department with people that understand real estate. You're going to have to answer the questions, how are we going to make the banks comply? What is it we want to do with this data once we have it? And do we have the ability to service what it is we think we want to do? And if you can't answer those questions, or if we can't service what we're selling, then you need to stop and design it in a way where you can. This isn't something you just lay out to a department and say, let's track all this. It sounds great. It doesn't happen that way. You've got a lot of movement in, you've got a lot of movement out. You have the issues this gentleman just addressed. And one of the terms you need to talk about as you do this, you need to define the terminology of what is foreclosure, what is distressed property, what are the identities of what it is you want to monitor, for what purpose. But you also need to consider forbearance. Where does forbearance fit in this as part of the foreclosure process? Does it get listed? Does it get monitored? Or is it exited because it's in a repayment plan, maybe, or maybe not? So the intention of what I heard this to be done and what I read is excellent. But taking that from theory to practice is going to be difficult until you define the crossroads of what you want to accomplish, and then make sure you can accomplish it. Because I think this data could be vital to you as city council, to the department heads, and to those laying out this master plan for the growth of this community, to understand our inventory, our infrastructure, building new houses, rehabbing old houses, who's got what and where it is. There's one thing that hasn't been mentioned here, and it's not that difficult to find owners of property. Get a title company involved and put together your servicing entity with the right people, and they can find owners of anything. And that's the way I would do it, and I think that's what you ought to consider. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next person signed up to speak is Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
Evening, governing body. I was looking at this ordinance just before I got here and had not had a chance to really digest it the way I'd like. One thing I did like about it was just simply the text of having a definition section. I've asked for that many times out of different ordinances we've drafted, and a lot of times I don't see it, but so I did like that. One of the problems I see with this is the amount of the fee. It's not de minimis. It's actually a pretty large amount to require people to pay. Finding out who the registered agent is on any corporation, any bank, is very simple. You just go online to the Secretary of State's office and you get the registered agent for that bank once you found out a bank owns it, and you can serve them with any process you wish. I actually had to do this on a house in my neighborhood because I couldn't find anybody, I'm not being crass here, but anybody at the city that could figure it out. We had a house over on Hillside that was being dismantled by a person who'd been evicted, and they literally were selling the parts of the house. And I got a hold of Wells Fargo, this is all public record, and I had to write a very demanding demand letter with lawyer letterhead that I personally would sue them with a private nuisance if they did not take control of that property and board it up and keep that individual off the property. Now, the police and the code enforcement also were helpful in this, but it took a neighbor to actually figure out how to deal with this bank, and it did get their attention, and they did board it up. And the house has now been resold. There's an occupant in it. So I'm glad that we got that problem solved. But that was a bank problem, and a bank that was ignoring, I was told, codes and everybody else. But when you nail them with the registered agent, with that legal service, they cannot ignore that. So I don't know how much of this is, I mean, it sounds like a great idea. I don't know how much it's going to cost. I always want to see a fiscal note. Whenever somebody proposes an idea like this, how much does it cost? Are you talking about hiring an FTE, another person to run this program? Are you going to farm it out? Is it going to go to a subcontractor in another state? Give me some details as to where this $500 goes, and how many of these $500 are you going to be collecting a year? Is it 6? Is it 30? Is it 300? How many foreclosures go on in this county? I mean, that's a public record. There's probably quite a few inside the city, but how many of those would actually meet this criteria? So I don't think you're ready to really pass this yet. I would personally, if I was up there, I'd have a lot more questions, but that's what caught my interest. I didn't think it was a bad idea. I just don't know that it's well thought out, and I was questioning the amount of the fee and if that would be seen as onerous, or maybe $100 sounds better. I don't know. But again, I don't know what the costs are that you're projecting, or if that's even been thought out. So that's all I have on this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. At this point in time, the item is open for the council for discussion. The city manager has requested that if there are questions with regards to the ordinance, that we have a conversation right now so that he could have some direction on how to proceed as they take a look at this. Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. And I've got kind of a long list. I was really pretty shocked at what came around, particularly after the comments at the council had listened and discussed, and I thought had clarified what they wanted to at least look at, and that being foreclosed properties only, to see what that plan might look like. I think whenever we do something, we need to know what it was, what the problem was, and what we're trying to fix. In my understanding of the problem that staff had identified was that in recent years, they had run up against some properties that were vacant and appeared to be vacant and neglected, and that when they sent the code letters, they didn't get a response, and ultimately figured out that they were in foreclosure. And when I asked how many of those they'd really been stumped and hadn't been able to find them, the answer was, somewhere around 25. And so if what we needed to solve, we have a code, we have all of that, once we discover or write up a property, we have them on a list, we have information about what's wrong, our inspectors follow up. So if the only problem we had was to solve for how do we find the owners if we think it's in foreclosure, or the neighbors say it is, whatever, then that would be the target, in my view. What we have before us is an ordinance that says on page 4 that the registrable property would be, item B, any property in the city that has been vacant for more than 30 days. That is a huge difference If you look at the census data for 2017 or various listings, just Google it real quick, we have somewhere between a 5 and 11% vacancy rate at any given time. With the number of properties that we have, and it depends on how people calculate a little bit, it means that in Topeka, we have between 2,600 and 4,200 vacant properties that would meet that definition, or that would be close at any given time. Likely most of them, since this ordinance requires that someone file it within 10 days of it being vacant, would be that entire number. Somehow a way overreach from what the problem was. You know, stiff penalties, there's been comments we would need a lot of staff to track that down. And the problem is that if the owners don't know about it, they're not going to come to us anyway. So we're going to have to go find them anyway. I would suggest that it sounds like the solution to this problem would just be to figure out an easy way to track down foreclosed properties. When you go on, again, Topeka's vacancy rate is such that be 2,600 to 400 that we would be keeping up with monthly. That's a lot. I think the number that was stated regarding foreclosures was about 500 when the report came last week. Even that, in a foreclosure situation, it takes after 30 days for it to go into default. It's just delinquent until then. And as someone pointed out earlier, then a foreclosure has to be filed by the lender whenever they get around to it, and there can be a redemption period of 6 to 18 months actually total, and the house can be occupied the whole time. Just because a property is in foreclosure doesn't mean it's vacant. Conversely, when you have rental properties in town, we have had a flat market for 50 years. The vacancy rate is high. Sometimes you need to wait for a good tenant, or you need to do some repairs on a property. It's not uncommon, and there's some landlords that have written in or that are here, for it to be 60 to 120 days to roll over a rental property. That would mean that every single rental property in town could be subject to this registration, which seems unnecessary, to make it brief. Along the way, in this ordinance as it's written right now, there's a requirement that every single one of those properties, after 10 days of being vacant, would have to have a sign on the front door that was no less than 18 by 24 inches with lettering on it big enough to read from the street, or at least 45 feet away, announcing that this property was vacant. Maybe people live in different neighborhoods, but in my experience, whenever any notice like that is on that property, that's like a bullseye that says, come on over, this house is vulnerable. I raised those issues. This proposal has gone round and round. I've been in group meetings with the whole council, one-on-ones early on. Again, I've raised that issue, and somehow it came back bigger and better than ever. If we were going to keep a registry, again, we already have it at code. It's computerized. You can look it up on your cell phone or your computer. We don't need to advertise. Also, out of the discussions here at the council was, well, what about people what if it's seasonal and they go to Arizona for the winter and come back? People have done that for years. As long as they button up their house and have somebody mowing the yard and checking, it's fine. Why would we need to charge those? That suggestion did not get incorporated into the language. We also all know that when there's a crisis, some tenant just moves out, somebody dies, somebody gets a job change, and so they move to Georgia and they can't sell their house before they left, so the house is going to be there for sale until it all works out, or any of a jillion things that happen in our own personal lives or families where a property might be vacant for a while. It doesn't need to go on a registry, it's just turnover. And once again, with our flat growth rate, actually it's been a little bit of a drop in the last year. We're working on all that. But if somehow there was an unspoken idea that by putting them on this registry, people would go ahead and get it sold or get it occupied or whatever, there's only so many households to go around. So we're asking for something that's virtually impossible with the way this ordinance is written. I also noted that in the testimony that we had, apparently Wichita had one but they don't use it. So why would we? I went, took the invitation of staff when the folks from Unified Government at Wyandotte County came to talk about their ordinances, and what they said was, ours didn't work very well, don't use it, wait till we update it, and apparently what we have is largely drawn from Wyandotte counties. We also had issues of contracts for deed and how to find them, estates that are unprobated, all of the things that have challenged code in finding owners before or planning when we're sending out hearings. But this registry is way overdone to solve those problems. And there are folks that can skip trace. I mean, if we really, there are probably better resources for free for us for finding mortgage holders. But if that company that the staff found, if we just paid them $100 to go check each time, each of the 25 times we couldn't find somebody, we'd have no overhead, no staff, no fines, no fees, no citizen input, no collections, no lawsuits, all of which this ordinance proposes. I just think we need to know what the problem is and solve for that. And I suspect it doesn't need a registry at all. Thank you.
Additional, Deputy Mayor.
I want to say I am glad we are doing something. You know, I think we have needed something for a long time because this is a problem in our community. I think once we can look at people's questions and answers and make sure that we have looked at all those, I have no problem with this, but I want to thank you for at least doing something. Thank you.
Councilman Jensen, to be followed by Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Your Honor. So as I see it, we're trying to solve two problems here. Sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. Often it doesn't involve a corporation or bank. It's an owner of a property that doesn't live in Topeka, doesn't live in the state. There are no registered agents for an individual that owns a piece of property that's not here. You can't go to the Secretary of State's website and look them up. If we're lucky, the address is on file with the county, but sometimes that's not a good address. Sometimes it really is impossible to find who actually owns this property. In the meantime, the people that live next door are next to an empty house, a non-occupied building. That building may meet minimum code. It may be safe. It may be, buttoned up structure. It just looks bad. And there's nothing that property owner can do, with the exception of filing a private lawsuit, attempting to hunt down the owner of the building and suing them for lowering their property value, which I'm told may or may not even be successful. In the meantime, they're sitting there losing value every year because their property is next to one that is abandoned for whatever reason. Now, again, if the taxes are paid and it meets minimum code, we really have no recourse other than to say, yep, I'm sorry, you're just stuck. I cannot tell you the number of emails I have gotten from people who are just stuck. And there's nothing in state law and there's nothing in the city code that allow us to do anything to help them other than say, yep, you indeed are stuck. So I'm particularly pleased that we've got any kind of plan in place for that. The other thing that we have to acknowledge and address is properties that don't have regular occupants absolutely have more requirement of public service. Our police department has to be more involved in that. They often fall into disrepair and require us to abate them, or they catch on fire and it requires the fire service. So these do use more resources than a normal property that's occupied. One question I have that maybe you could answer, Councilwoman Heller, is we've been told again and again that we have such a need for housing in this community, that we're down 8,000 units, but then on the same time, we have property that's available that sits vacant for 120 days. I'm not saying that those two problems don't truly exist, but I don't understand why we have an issue on one complete side and why we have an issue on the other complete side, when if they both came together, they would solve each other's needs. Now, I recognize that sometimes price point is an issue, school district is an issue, that sort of thing, but at the same time, I don't feel like we should have a problem on either extreme. Now, this may be something that the housing study is going to sort out, but if we have so many available homes and so many people that need them, where's the process to solve that? Thank you.
Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I too think this is a really good start. And as Deputy Mayor had said, I'm glad that we're doing something and taking a look at this. I think we do need some work on it. I think we do need to streamline some of the information, identify some different things. But I do feel that it's needed. And I want to thank staff for their work up to this point and look forward to moving forward on it in whatever form that comes. Thank you.
City Manager.
Mayor, I think some of these questions we may be able to answer. Sasha's been intimately involved in this, obviously, in preparing it. And so I think some of these, rather than let them hang, that we should probably go ahead and allow her to address some of them, to any misconceptions as far as intention for our program and that type of thing. So if Director Hahn would please come forward.
Your Honor, governing body members, Mr. Manager, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll start by saying the response to why we're doing this is because this group and the folks that sit in those chairs have directed us to find more tools, new tools, better tools to fix the blight issue in this community. This is not driven by our inability to find property owners or our inability to effectively do our jobs with the IPMC that the governing body has adopted. What this does is give your community the ability to put increased scrutiny on properties, just like Councilmember Jensen was describing, that are in all of your neighborhoods. And it also provides a financial incentive to the people that own those properties or are managing a foreclosed property to get it back into productive use. The purpose of code enforcement is to do two things: to protect the public health and safety in our neighborhoods and to protect the property values of the people that live in the neighborhoods. So this is not about beauty or us trying to single out individual owners. This is a tool that we believe that you should consider. To address concerns from the last conversation about impoverished property owners or other folks that might be negatively impacted by the 3 registries that we presented to you a couple of weeks ago, we pulled back the neglected property registry. There was a lot of conversation about what are we going to do about someone that owns a property that can't afford to maintain it. Those are good questions. That the answer is we got to have more money to address those issues, and we don't. So we pulled that one back. We've brought you the foreclosure and vacant registry because this seems like, of all of the many layers in the community that constitute blight, these are the low-hanging fruits. Banks should not have foreclosed properties that sit in your neighborhoods for months and years at a time and deteriorate and just blight the neighborhood and affect the people that live around them. They shouldn't. You shouldn't have to deal with that. The banks do have a process. Foreclosure is not a quick and speedy process, and we understand that, but we've run into properties that have sat for years, literally, and that's unnecessary. The banks will respond to a financial incentive to move those properties through the process and get them back into productive use, which not only benefits my department because that's one less property that we have to worry about citing, but it benefits the people that live around it, just like you guys are talking about. So that was the purpose of the foreclosure registration for you guys to consider. That's very low-hanging fruit. The vacant registration is intended to target chronically vacant properties. So the threshold says 30 days, but if you read the ordinance, it goes on to say for no utilities for a minimum of 60 days or the windows and doors are boarded. So we are not going to be running around asking snowbirds or landlords who are taking their time to rent their properties to good tenants, we're not asking them to register. What we're talking about is properties like White Lakes Mall. That's a perfect example. That is a giant vacant blight on our community. That's a good example. It's not in foreclosure, but it would very well end up on this registry. And even west of those older core areas of town, we can find vacant properties that are just sitting, languishing. And it's not good for your property tax base, it's not good for the people that live around them, and it just contributes to the overall conversation of blight. So the intention was to give you tools for us to consider that could perhaps produce a little movement on the low-hanging fruits. Other questions that I may have missed, please tell me, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Additional questions for Ms. Hahn? Yes, Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. There seems to be an awful lot of confusion about what we would do to try and find an owner of a property. Can you briefly just run through what your department does, the tools you have, and the process by which you do that?
Absolutely. So we absolutely use the Shawnee County Register of Deeds, the appraisers database that is public. We also have access to the foreclosure database that Mr. Delap was referencing. And another database that if I tried to tell you the name and exactly what's in it, it's from the county, but it's not public. We have access to it. So those are three very local tools. Just this year, Mike paid for a subscription to a skip tracing service, so we can look up people that we have a bad address on. Oftentimes we do find the bank that has the property in foreclosure, but the problem that we have is that all of that foreclosure paperwork doesn't tell us who is the person at the bank that is responsible for property management. Who's responsible for making sure that that foreclosed property is maintained, because someone gets paid to do that for the banks. And then at times it has taken us months to find that person. Not who the bank is or who the registered agent of the bank is, but who is the person that is responsible for maintaining the property. Those are the types of things that we'd get. I'm sure that I'm missing tools that they use to find property owners, but the property record that's public, we have access to a couple more databases that are not public but have very good information in them, and we are utilizing a skip tracing service. So those are the major ways in which we find property owners. A lot of times the inspectors will also talk to the neighbors, because the neighbors often know better than anyone else who owns it, where they're at, and what's going on with it, and who their kids are. So that's another really good resource that we use. Other questions?
Yes, Councilman Jensen to be followed by Councilman Lesser.
So what would a licensed real estate professional be able to do that your team can't?
I can't answer that. The city did used to have a licensed real estate officer. I am your real estate officer. I do not have a real estate license, but I have been involved in the acquisition and disposition of property. I've been involved, I can't answer that. I don't know.
Thank you.
Councilman Lesser to be followed by Councilwoman Ortiz.
I would think we could also, in those circumstances, we have a contract with a collection, CBK, that could also, I would think, assist us with some of those tracing opportunities. I do have a question that,
Sure.
How would we handle the situation where we have a property right now that as beautiful as we're doing with our downtown at 8th and Jackson, that just sits there continues to deteriorate. It used to be the old office bar and grill.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly, that guy's sitting there just waiting for property values to go up, for the plaza to go up, and it's been vacant for 2 years, probably. How would this situation address situations such as that?
So in a scenario like that where the business property is vacant, he would have to pay us a registration fee every 6 months. And the intent of that registration fee is to motivate folks to either sell it, get it in productive use, not just let it sit and languish like the property that you're talking about. So it would be a financial incentive for the owner to do something with the property, because as soon as it becomes occupied, then if there's no foreclosure action, then he's off the registration list. So it would require him to spend a little more money than he is to keep his property vacant.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you. I would like to see, and I guess you kind of hit on it, the registration fee for the low to moderate income. You know, I'm not going to call anybody out, but I know people that have inherited, apartments, and they don't have the funds to go in and rehab all of them. Or somebody that has inherited, a home from a loved one, and they don't have the funds to go in and do that. So they kind of work on it as they go. And so I would like to see us do maybe a registration fee that's affordable, and that we go back and because we can go back and we can see if they're doing what they're saying they're going to do, or have them show us receipts or whatever we do. But I would like to see that for the low to moderate income, because that's what I run into a lot in my district, is that people that just can't afford it. And if they're trying to put it on the historical list, then they're trying to put it back the way that it was, it might be more expensive to them. So everybody doesn't have just a cache of money, but I think that would be a way to say, okay, you come down, you register, you pay a fee, not 30 days, but maybe 60 days, go back and say, okay, we need to see what you need to bring into us, make them be responsible, bring it to us, update your registration and show us what you've done. If we don't already have that in play, I would like to see that, because I think that we have to look at that. I see some homes that have we probably should have demolished them, and some of my constituents have went in and they put the stucco on, they've made it look really, really good. They didn't do it over time. And we know who those offenders are. We know who they are. So to be so stiff, I think we should just probably work with the landlords and the owners, and then we'll know who we're looking at or who we're looking for. To answer somebody's question, our H&D director, our ex-H&D director, Randy Speaker, he had a land bank or did something with that, and he had it in, because I could call him and tell him this property has not been cut, and he would get on the phone and find out who that banker was, and that grass would be cut, or we would find them. And he did that quite frequently for me, because they're supposed to be taking care of their property, even though it's vacant, So that's something I would like for us to look at. Because I kind of thought that 30 days is just a quick turnaround. And I don't know where that came from. I just think that would drive staff crazy.
That's the minimum threshold, and to kind of answer that question, 30 or even 60 days seems like a very short period of time, and I don't disagree. The vacant piece of the registration, your inspectors know which properties belong on that vacant registry. And I totally get what you're saying. If there's some activity on the house and it's not just sitting, then we would definitely be wanting to work with the owners, because our intent is to get it back into productive use.
Right.
We can't make them look beautiful, but we want it to meet the minimum standard and be in productive use.
And how would we handle it? I don't know, Mike might be able to answer this. I know we have homes now where they can go in during the day because they don't have any electricity or anything, and they can go in there and work on their facilities. And how will that be handled now if we adopt this?
So on those properties that you're talking about, Councilmember Ortiz, that has a condemnation order attached to it because there's no electric or water service. You're exactly right. That's what triggers that. But code does work with the owners of those properties when we have communication with them and we know, here's my plan and I'm going to work on it, and here's when I think I can be done. And we do allow them to be on the premises for certain hours because the condemnation says nobody can inhabit this space, right? So we give them the ability to go in there and work on the properties because, again, we're just trying to get voluntary compliance. in every case. We just want folks to take care of their property.
But if we pass this, I thought I heard it stated that they have to have electricity and utilities on, or,
So the threshold to establish vacancy would be, it's been vacant for more than 30 days, and then if you read down in there, it says, no utility service for at least 60 days, or boards on the doors and windows that indicates that it's vacant and been shut up. So that's a threshold.
oh, okay.
So our inspectors are going
And/or.
to, right, we're going to be looking at the like the White Lakes in the world. You know, we know that nobody is occupying that building. It's just sitting there languishing. The bowling alley on 6th Avenue that got knocked down a couple years ago, that's another good example. It just sat there and we knew there was no activity. So that 60 days, no utility service and boarded doors and windows is a threshold that we can start at. Because we want to be reasonable. We're not trying to hit anyone over the head with a hammer here. We're just trying to move the needle on some of these that are the low-hanging fruit.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Padilla, to be followed by Councilman Emerson, to be followed by Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Mayor. Sachi, I like your example of White Lakes. That's in my district, and that is an eyesore. I'm working with a group of businessmen right now who are very interested in doing their part in trying to beautify Topeka Boulevard as a gateway to Topeka. And every time we get together and meet, they point to that piece of property as something that just is an eyesore that everyone who comes to Topeka through the airport gateway and through Forbes sees those properties just sitting there with no activity. But I'd like to share with you, I know I have a situation that one of my constituents has shared with us that they have some frustration with, and I think you may know, I won't get exactly the address and so forth, but they express their concern and frustration with properties, vacant properties in their neighborhood, and they know that code has been out there and tried to do what they can. Police have been out there to try to do what they can, but continuing are activities that aren't legal. People have occupied a vacant property. They know it to be vacant. They've started to tear apart insides of the property and burn it, parts of the material so they can generate heat, so they can stay in that property. They've gone to a close-by home that it too is vacant and started to strip it from the interior so that they can also burn the materials for heat and so forth. So again, these are just things that happen in a neighborhood, small size as opposed to White Lakes, that something has to be in place for the city to address it, because it's not just a detraction to the neighborhood, but it's a safety issue. There are activities that are going on that we can't monitor, unsafe conditions, and for us to just let that happen with not any attempt to address it, I think does a disservice to our community. So I appreciate the effort. It may not be the clean thing that everybody wants, but I think given some time to look at it and work out the details, regardless of whether other communities have had them in some form and they didn't work, it might be that maybe if we have if we learn from their lessons and make a commitment to make it work, not just let it sit there, I think that incentive is important, because you've got to do something to motivate the people who have those properties who aren't doing anything with them. So I commend the staff and city manager for giving us a start, and would be more than willing to pass on other ideas and situations to you and your staff so you can consider them and how an ordinance like this would help the situation that I just described. Thank you, Sasha.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, Mr. Padilla said a lot of things that I've been thinking on this as well. The thing I struggle with, I guess, the most is when we're trying to solve a problem that's has just a few really egregious cases, we sometimes pass things that kind of entrap a lot of people that aren't doing anything wrong,
Agreed.
that are very conscientious. And that is one of the things that troubles me about this. Again, I know the intent is fantastic here. I am worried about some of the ramifications of it, though, as written. Even just the thing you've talked about a couple times where a property will be vacant 30 days, and then it also says furthermore, 60 days of no utilities. And again, I can see situations, as you mentioned, and other people have mentioned, snowbirds. I know people that go to Phoenix for the winter, and even though we're saying we won't target them, those people still are going to be almost like criminals under this. They're leaving their property, and there's something, when we pass things that criminalizes or causes, people that are following the law or trying to follow the law, that troubles me. And again, I know that's not your intent, but as written, I could see where that could apply. And I guess just as a thought, I don't know if this is something that we can just iterate over the next few weeks and, just have some back and forth. I see this as something that maybe should go to a committee for an in-depth, a series of meetings and have people from, like, the landlords, for instance, come in and talk, because again, I think we all heard on the council from a number of landlords that are well-known and very respected landlords in our community. They want the same things we do. They want to eliminate blight, and they want, but they're very concerned as written, so, thanks.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you. The initial question I had been answered, but I don't know a single snowboard that goes away and turns the power off to their house or boards up their windows. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard very clearly that if the windows aren't boarded up and you still have utilities to your home and it's being taken care of, that's not considered abandoned regardless of how long you're gone. Am I right there?
That's correct. That's what the draft ordinance says.
Right. So snowboards would not be affected by this in any way as long as they leave the power and the water turned on to their home.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess to me, that wasn't clear in the ordinance. I think that's the intent, but it just wasn't clear that was the intent. Because it said if it's vacant for more than 30 days, and then or 60 days of no utilities.
Which, again, would say, if I could respond,
Yes,
that's a
absolutely.
threshold. So let's say we do identify a snowbird's property that hasn't had utilities in 60 days, and we send them the letter that says, hey, you have to register your vacant property. And they contact us back and they said, what? I go to Florida for 3 months, and so those things we are going to work through on an individual case-by-case property basis. And I guess we will definitely work with legal to try to come up with language that makes you all more comfortable, that we're not just going to be, sending your mom a note to register her house because she goes out of state for the winter. That's not at all the intent, nor is a rental property, that it is just taking a little more than 30 or 60 days to get it occupied. Again, chronically vacant is what we're trying to address. But we clearly haven't done a good job with the language in the ordinance, so we will work on that.
Councilman Emerson.
So, and thank you for that. And again, I know that's not your intent. I just think there needs to be some cleanup of this to make it very explicit. But to kind of elaborate on the point you brought up. So I've been in business for 30 years, and every time I get like a registered letter to pick up from the post office and it says like from Dallas or wherever the IRS sends, or even if it's not something, there's this, your blood pressure goes up. And it's never good to get a letter from the city or the state or Colorado or the IRS. So as nice as it can be, or your ex-wife. But yeah, I'm just afraid that as written, it could capture a lot of people who are trying to do the right thing, so.
So, City Manager, I think that we have heard from pretty much all the council members tonight with their concerns, and I think that we have direction, if that's what you were looking for, regards to how to start answering these questions. And then furthermore, give you some idea of the time that it would take for you to work through all of these to ensure that the body and the public as well, with their comments, have been addressed. So since there was no motion at this point in time for approval, I think that you stated early on that this was an action that was going to be deferred.
Yes, based on the input that I had received prior to the meeting, I felt that to attempt to have it considered for a vote wouldn't be appropriate, given the concerns and questions. We want you to feel comfortable with the language that's there. Whether you disagree or agree with the language, understand what it is that is trying to be accomplished. And so for us, that's an important step that we need to do. Clearly, there has been a lot of input. If you have something that you didn't get tonight that you would like to see considered, please email me, and we'll take a look at that as well, get with legal and get with Sasha's department and see what we can do to make modifications to this. It'll probably be a few weeks until we can get back to this, and we'll just put it back on the agenda when you're ready to.
Do we need to have a vote for the deferral, and do you have a time frame that you would like to bring it back?
No, so we'll probably have to go 5 weeks.
5 weeks?
Because the interviews are the 12th, so we'll have to wait. So it'll probably be November 19th.
November 19th. So we have a date. So what we will look for is a motion for deferral towards November 19th.
So moved.
We have a motion by Councilwoman Ortiz and a second by Councilman Jensen. She had her hand up before. Additional discussion on this item. Councilwoman Hiller.
Do we really have to set a date? I mean, it hasn't, there was never a motion, and I guess I don't want to rush. I think there's some things that staff's going to want to think through, so I just hate to keep,
Well,
because you could just put it on when it's ready.
yeah, but I think my intent would be is that we would defer to that date. We do want to try and get this in place, if we can, by the first of the year. So I would like to attempt to that. If for some reason it's not available, I'll let you know that it won't be added to the agenda related to that.
Because you have the right to pull it.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Additional, Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. I do see somebody in the audience that wanted to speak on this, if we can allow that person to speak. I don't know if she signed up.
We would have to suspend rules.
I'll suspend the ruus.
So we
Make a
have,
motion that we allow somebody to speak on this.
do we have a second for suspension of the rules? Councilman Emerson seconds that motion. At this point in time, the motion would be to suspend the regulation that states that you can only sign up to right before the meeting, so that somebody could speak up on this specific item. Councilman Jensen.
Is there just one person, or are there multiple people?
I'm just proposing one person that's a landlord. That's
Okay.
all I'm proposing.
Well, if we're going to suspend the rules, we might as well let anybody else who would like to speak about this issue do so.
I haven't seen anybody wave at me.
Okay, good enough for me.
But I mean, you know, we can do whatever, but I've just had one person nod at me.
Okay, so at this point in time, we have a motion to suspend the rules to allow one individual to sign up.
To speak?
To speak. Do you have the name of the individual so that we could make the motion clear?
Miss Betty.
Betty Griner. Okay, so if we have a motion and a second, I think that at this point in time, we proceed with the voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 have been voting yes, the motion passes. Ms. Griner, you have the floor for 4 minutes.
I'll do it in 3. I'm tired. My name is Betty Allen, and I'm the president of the Shawnee County Landlords Association. And I have loved this discussion. I'm glad I didn't go home and take a nap. But this has been a great discussion of a very important thing that needs to be done. I would say that we have been working with code compliance for 2 years, maybe, on this process of registration, and we come up with stuff and they come up with stuff and all of that. So we totally understand the process and what you're looking for, because we landlords have issues with people that are bad landlords that cause us heartburn also. And if you don't have landlords, you're going to be in trouble with all the people that need to have homes. And I'm hearing more and more landlords in this city saying that all this is crap, they're not gonna deal with it. They are selling their properties, and that's not good. There's not tons of them, but there's enough to make it be a situation where if they start selling, and the problem is a lot of the people they're gonna be selling to are people outside of Kansas, coming from the East Coast and the West Coast, and they're coming in and they're buying. So keep that in mind, and you already know that. I'm sure all of you know that. But keep that in mind as we're going through, try to keep working what we can do here to make it work for the landlords, for the tenants, for you folks, for code compliance and everything. I could go on and on and on and on, but I'm not going to. But I appreciate you letting me talk, because I want you to know that we landlords appreciate this discussion. We may not like some of the things, but we would like to be included if you have a committee or a task force or anything like that, if you would consider including us to be a part of it, because I think we could be an asset to help out, because understanding what the landlords are doing, and you understand the other side, and Slasha understands the code compliance restrictions. That's all I have to say. That was 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen, and sorry for the last name confusion.
Huh? Oh, that's okay. You got a lot on your mind.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion, we have a second for the deferral. The action on this motion would be to defer to November 19th. So at this point in time, we proceed with voting. Oh, I don't vote. Home rule, home rule. The mayor does not vote.
Yeah, we're gonna vote again. Okay.
We need to vote again.
So we have council members Hiller, Clear, Padilla, because I deferred the board. All right, we have 8 yes.
8 having voted yes, the motion passes. At this point in time, it's 8 o'clock. I'm going to look around the body to see if they need a recess. We typically do a recess around 8.
Keep going.
Okay, I'm getting a yes. So we're going to recess for a period not to exceed 10 minutes. So we will be back.